Welcome to Walton County 200. We have finally reached Walton County's 200th anniversary this year in 2024. I started my Walton County countdown back in 2004 to kind of help get that message out that the date was 2024. But I like to go back in some of my presentations that I've done over the years and go way back to at least the American, English, British, French, Spanish time. So this is a map by Chavez in 1584, Artelius's Atlas of the World. And this is La Florida, and it shows it covering most of the United States. So we can tell most people, welcome home to Florida. Another giant leap was during the American Revolution when Florida, West Florida and East Florida were still part of the British colonies. They fought against the other American colonies. So the colony of West Florida that Walton County was a part of eventually went all the way to the Mississippi River. And then here we have, this is an 1822 map, but it shows the current borders of Florida in the first 4 counties. The first 2 counties in Florida were Escambia and St. John's. The dividing line was the Suwannee River. The very next year in 1822, Jackson County is made from Escambia and Duval from St. John's. There were a few counties in 1823, and then what happened in 1824 was that Walton County was founded December 29th, along with Leon, Alachua, Nassau, and here's fun, Mosquito County. And so in 1845, Mosquito County changed to in 1845 it changed to Orange. So we don't have Mosquito County anymore. Going way back though too, I like to talk about our sand, which is really a major factor here in Florida, that it came down from the Appalachian Mountains. It's SiO2, siliclastic, pure quartz, that during the last Oligocene, it came down to Apalachicola and drifted westward. So that's what gives Walton County its fabulous, special white beaches. It's just powdery soft, and so it's really our best selling point. So we've really kept it pretty much pristine. We used to have we still have some in our places, but the large coastal dune prairies. And what happened was 10,000 years ago, the shoreline was 100 miles out, and about 3,000 years ago, it slowed down, and we have what we have now, and that enabled the coastal dune lakes, which everyone loves and talks about, to develop. So that gets up there, and one reason, here we are, this high elevation. When other parts of Florida were underwater, this part of Florida was high and dry, some different elevations, and we have our Britton Hill, which is up north, and it's the highest elevation in Florida. It's the lowest high in America at 345 feet. So you have a lot of tall dunes and landscape here in this part of Florida. But in 1528, the Narvaez expedition with Cabeza de Vaca sailed by our shores, and it was probably around September the 29th, because Cabeza de Vaca, when he finally got back to Spain, wrote a journal about it, and he wrote about it being on San Miguel Day, which is September 29th. So that's probably about the time in 1528 some of the earlier European explorers passed by the shores of South Walton, just right out here. And he noted native peoples up in the dunes and the forest and the shoreline. There's one map I have here somewhere. It was 1837 by John Lee Williams, and what it shows for all of the South Walton part of Walton County is sand hills, and that's what's written on the map. We're going to kind of leap forward. We talked about the British, but Walton County then, in that December 29th, 1824, I was working on a paper, and my good friend Sonny Yates was looking for a picture of George Walton Jr., and I had gone back to do another paper on another topic. And I said, no, Sonny, I don't have time to look for that. But I hung the phone up. He and Marilyn Devlin had called me. And I said, darn. So I went, and other research entailed. And so it ended up finding George Walton Jr., the portrait, which people at that point, living at that time, had not seen the portrait of him. And I premiered that at the 2006 Walton County History Fair. But then this is really important, and there's like 6 I'm going to show you. This is the 24 border, and it goes from way over here. What you see is Fort Walton, and then down to like Shell Island, and that's the counties that are now there: Bay and Washington and Holmes and Okaloosa. Well, the very next year, and maybe why with the McKinnon date being wrong of 1828, a lot of the South Walton history got missed, because what happened in 1825, South Walton went to help make up Washington County. So from Destin, all of South Walton left, and it went to Washington County. Now that wasn't the only change, because what happened is there were all these counties being developed, and the legislature was controlled by the number of counties, not people, until the Voting Rights Act of 1964. So they kept developing counties. West Florida was in control, so they were always making sure they had more counties in West Florida than East Florida remained controlled until the Voting Rights Act of 1964. So here's a map, and you can see where Fort Walton is not in the border in this map. Well, and that is, let me see, that is 1848 to 1951. And then you have this one, though, January 11th, 1851 to 1853. Aha! How did we get Camp Walton down there? Because it's in Walton County at that point. Look, Walton County, during that Civil War, had a little outlet to the Gulf, even though all this Destin and South Walton area still remained in Washington County. So then, still again, this is up through 1913. 1913, you still had Camp Walton there. And that's why when I come back and talk about L.I. Smith, and he was on the Circle, he lived next door to John McKinnon on the Circle. His house was, and Dr. Dye were next to McKinnon. But he also had the Gulf View Hotel and sold it to the Staffs and Burlocks. So that's how that happened. Well, then, very important, in 1913, South Walton came back in Destin. So that was the border from May 1913 to September of 1915. What happened then in 1915 is Walton County and Santa Rosa counties gave up their land to make up Okaloosa, and so that's pretty much the border we have now from 1915. I want to talk about Alaqua just really briefly as being an early county seat and very important, as were other areas, but this is from Pensacola to St. Augustine in 1827 by the Reverend Michael Portier, and it was published in the Florida Historical Journal. It was published obviously earlier, but within that he talks several times about Alaqua and Methodist. There were many different churches represented here, but in Alaqua he specifically talked about the help of some Methodists that gave him some food and shelter, because he was walking pretty much by himself from Mobile to St. Augustine. He was like the first bishop, Catholic, and so he was walking through his area from Mobile to St. Augustine. He wrote and he published his work. So this is a very important document that a lot of people maybe haven't had a chance to look at. We've got us up to West Florida, and then what happened in 1819, you had John Quincy Adams, and he was a Secretary of State, and he signed the Adams-Onis Treaty that didn't buy Florida. We sort of procured it from Spain because they owed some money, so it was sort of a deal. So what happened, you saw that big border of Florida here with West Florida, and then it contracted. This is pretty much the border after the 1819 Adams-Onis Treaty, and then in 1821 Florida became the territory. So that's how we've got the border that we have today. And back to the British again, because the Choctawhatchee Bay, it was misnamed or that back during the American Revolution, because remember, the British have West Florida and they are marching through, and they misname it. It's probably the Choctawhatchee River, because before that it was Santa Rosa Bay. So a lot of all the old maps before that, and that's why we have so many Santa Rosas here, because it was the Santa Rosa Bay, Santa Rosa Sound, Santa Rosa Island. So now we have our Santa Rosa Beach, and that's why people are confused. Well, Santa Rosa County is 2 counties over, and why do we have, I think Hogtown Bayou is really you'll see it as Santa Rosa Bayou in some places. So that's how we ended up, short story of all the Santa Rosa names, because it used to be Santa Rosa Bay, and so it covered all this area. I do want to talk about, and I talk about St. Rose, Point Washington. A lot of people, as far as real war heroes in Walton County area, we have to talk about, and I can get up here and go and get, this is Confederate States of America Brigadier General William Miller of Point Washington. And he saved Tallahassee. Tallahassee was the only capital that did not fall to Union troops. And so he was noted for that. There's a statue. If you go there, it's just north of Wakulla, in Wakulla Springs. But Dale Cox has a really good book, The Battle of Natural Bridge. I'll give him a plug there. But Miller's home was on 395, and he gave the land, he and his wife Marie gave the land for the Point Washington Methodist Church, the library, a cemetery, a schoolyard, I think a post office, and different things. So that was Confederate States of America Brigadier General William Miller, and he died in 1909. Little Evie Saltzman, who lived across the street, saw him drop dead in the front yard, and it was only later that he was moved to a Confederate Monument Cemetery in St. John's in Pensacola. But Confederate States of America, William Miller, and then I should have just maybe stayed over there. He owned Grayton Beach before and after Major Gray. So it could have easily been Millerton Beach, but it's Grayton Beach that everyone knows about. There's some great books that the Historic Society of Grayton Beach has did, and also one that the state did that talks about during the some of the native peoples and some of the atrocities that happened in those early years. And you can read that, but the information is out there both in the state archives and in the territorial papers. And that's how I found out anyway, discovered that the date wasn't 1828, it's going back to the original territorial papers and reading when that happened. 1822, here's an old Point Washington story. Roche came in, and 1822 Roche came, and in Point Washington, and it was obviously a territory then, got in a boat at Point Washington and traveled up the Choctawhatchee River and had Roche's Bluff, which became Mount Vernon, which we now know as Vernon. So there was a lot of activity. People don't really appreciate how important really this, because we were left out. The McKinnon book started in 1828, and people just didn't know this history, and that we were in Washington County until 1913 and didn't come back until then. So it just got lost.